Monday night, September 23rd, 1935. Harlem. Officer James Donnelly's flashlight cuts through the darkness of a narrow alley off Lenox Avenue. The beam catches something slumped against a brick wall. At first, he thinks it's a drunk sleeping it off. Then he sees the blood. Vincent Clutch, Mel, mid-30s. 3 bullet holes, 2 in the chest, 1 in the throat. His blood still pooling on the pavement, spreading slow and thick like motor oil. The smell hits Donnelly before he gets close. Copper and gunpowder, the stink of fresh death. But it's what's pinned to Clutch's chest that makes Donnelly's hand freeze on his whistle. A handwritten note, plain paper, neat block letters, soaked in blood but still readable. 1 down, 7 to go. Leave Harlem. This is the first of 8 bodies that would drop in 7 days. A countdown written in blood. A message to the most feared gangster in New York. Get out of Harlem or die. The target? Arthur Flegenheimer. You know him better as Dutch Schultz, bootlegger, racketeer, and one of the most ruthless white mobsters to ever terrorize the city. A man with judges in his pocket, cops on his payroll, and Tammany Hall protecting him like a favorite son. Untouchable. Or so he thought. The man who sent the message? Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. Street name, Bumpy. Enforcer. Strategist. A man who could beat you to death with his bare hands or outthink you at a chessboard. And a man who, exactly 7 days earlier, had been humiliated in front of 200 people. Let me take you back. Monday, September 16th, 1935. The Cotton Club, Harlem. If you don't know the Cotton Club, here's what you need to understand. It was the crown jewel of Harlem nightlife, where the best black jazz musicians in America performed for the whitest, richest crowds in New York. Duke Ellington on stage, Cab Calloway crooning into the mic, Lena Horne dancing under the lights. But if you were black and wanted to sit down, enjoy a drink, be a customer instead of the help, you weren't welcome. Whites only. Jim Crow with a velvet rope and a jazz band. On this particular Monday night, the club is packed. Cigarette smoke hangs thick in the air. The house band's in full swing, brass section wailing. White patrons in tailored suits and silk dresses fill the tables, laughing too loud, drinking too much. Black waiters glide between them like ghosts, trays balanced, eyes down. At a corner table near the back sits Dutch Schultz, drunk, loud. Holding court with 5 of his boys, Irish and Italian muscle, the kind of men who get paid to hurt people. Across the room, near the side entrance, stands Bumpy Johnson, quiet, watching. He's there because Stephanie St. Clair, Madam Queen, Harlem's fiercest policy banker, sent him to keep an eye on things. Bumpy doesn't drink, doesn't dance, just observes. Schultz spots him. Maybe it's the liquor. Maybe it's arrogance. Maybe Schultz has been itching to make a point ever since he started his invasion of Harlem's numbers racket, trying to muscle out the black operators who'd built the game from nothing. Whatever the reason, Schultz stands up. The table goes quiet. Heads turn. And Dutch Schultz, in front of 200 people, in the middle of Harlem's most famous nightclub, uses the ugliest racial slur you can imagine. Loud. Deliberate. Meant to carry across the room. You think you run Harlem? Schultz's voice cuts through the music like broken glass. You don't run shit. You're working for me now. You and every other... He uses the word again. Slower this time. Savoring it. In this neighborhood. You hear me, boy? The band stops mid-note. The brass section goes silent. The drummer's sticks freeze in the air. Every single person in that room, white patrons, black performers, waiters, bartenders, turns to look at Bumpy Johnson. This is the moment, in front of everybody. A white gangster calling out a black enforcer, treating him like a child, like property, like something less than human. The room holds its breath. Bumpy doesn't raise his voice, doesn't pull a gun, doesn't even move from where he's standing. He just locks eyes with Schultz across that smoky, silent room and says, calm as a Sunday sermon, "You got 7 days. After that, every man you got in Harlem is a dead man." Then he turns, walks to the door, and nobody, not Schultz's muscle, not the club bouncers, not a single soul, tries to stop him. The door swings shut behind him. 6 hours and 43 minutes later, Officer Donnelly finds Vincent, clutch Mel, bleeding out in that Lenox Avenue alley with a note pinned to his chest. The countdown has begun. Before we go any further, drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? And have you ever heard this story before? Let me know. That's the story Harlem has told for 90 years. 8 men, 7 days. A perfect revenge arc. Bumpy Johnson, the quiet enforcer who wouldn't bow. Dutch Schultz, the racist bully who pushed too far. A countdown written in blood that ended with the most feared mobster in New York backing down. It's a hell of a story, but here's the thing. When you dig into the archives, when you start pulling court records and police blotters and newspaper clippings from 1935, the story starts to crack. Let's start with the Cotton Club. I wanted to find out everything I could about that Monday night confrontation. September 16th, 1935. 200 witnesses, a public humiliation, a death threat delivered in front of half of Harlem's underworld. That kind of scene should leave a paper trail, right? So I went looking. First stop, the Cotton Club itself, and immediately we've got a problem. Yes, the Cotton Club was real. Yes, it was whites only, despite being in the heart of Harlem. Yes, it was owned by gangsters, specifically Oni Madden, a bootlegger with ties to every major mob family in the city. All of that checks out. But by September 1935, the Harlem location was either closed or on its last legs. See, the original Cotton Club sat at 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue. It had been there since 1923, the crown jewel of what they called the Harlem Renaissance. Though let's be real, black Harlemites mostly experienced it from the outside looking in. But after the Harlem race riot in March of 1935, the business climate changed. White patrons got nervous, revenues dropped. Madden and his partners started planning a move. Most credible histories agree. The Harlem Cotton Club closed sometime in 1935 and reopened the following year in Midtown Manhattan, Broadway and 48th Street. A new location, a new crowd. A slightly less segregated door policy because downtown audiences expected it. So if this confrontation happened on September 16th, 1935, at the Cotton Club in Harlem, the timing doesn't quite line up. Either the club was already closed, or it was a week or two from shutting its doors for good. Could it have happened at a different club? Sure, Harlem had dozens of speakeasies, after-hours joints, policy operations running out of the back of nightclubs. Could the legend have swapped the location for a more famous name? Absolutely. But that's the first crack, first red flag. Now let's talk about the bodies. Vincent Clutch Mel, Raymond Red Sullivan, Thomas Little Tommy, Brennan, Anthony Little Tony Benedetto, Joseph Joey Numbers, Catalano, Harold Bunny, Weinstein, Patrick O'Brien, and one more whose name changes depending on who's telling the story. 8 men, 7 days, each one a Schultz operator, each one killed execution style, each one left with a handwritten countdown note. 1 down, 7 to go. Leave Harlem. That's the legend. So I went hunting. Police blotters, newspaper archives, the New York Times, the Daily News, the New York Amsterdam News, which covered Black Harlem like no other paper in the city. Court records, coroner reports, crime databases that catalog every documented mob hit from the 1920s and 30s. And here's what I found. Nothing. No cluster of 8 Schultz men killed in 1 week in September 1935. No countdown notes reported in any newspaper. No police investigation into a serial execution spree targeting Dutch Schultz's Harlem operations. Now, don't get me wrong, Harlem in 1935 was absolutely a war zone. People were dying. The numbers racket was soaked in blood. Dutch Schultz's men were getting killed, and so were the black operators who refused to surrender. I found plenty of murders tied to the policy wars. But 8 men in 7 days, with notes pinned to their chests, in a neat narrative countdown? No hard documentation. The phrase, 1 down, 7 to go. Leave Harlem shows up in modern true crime books, blog posts, and TV shows about Bumpy Johnson. But when you try to trace it back to an original 1930s source, a police report, a newspaper article, a trial transcript, it disappears. Second red flag. So what's going on here? Is this whole thing a myth? Did I just spend an hour telling you a complete fabrication? Some Harlem folklore that got passed down through barbershops and pool halls until it hardened into fake history? Not quite. Because while the story might not be literally true, 8 bodies, 7 days, countdown notes, the war it describes, that was very, very real, and way uglier than the legend. See, legends form for a reason. They take something complicated, something brutal and messy, and spread out over months or years, and they compress it into a story people can remember. A story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. A story with a moral. The 8 and 7 days tale is Harlem's way of making sense of a grinding, vicious conflict that didn't have clean battle lines or a Hollywood ending. But the bones of it, the rage, the violence, the racial hatred, the body count, all real. So let's go back. Let's look at what actually happened in Harlem in the early 1930s, when Dutch Schultz decided he wanted to own the numbers game and didn't care how many black operators he had to bury to get it. Because that story, the true one, is somehow even darker than the legend. If you're hooked, smash that like button. It helps more people find stories like this. And comment. What time is it where you are right now? To understand what really happened, you need to understand what Harlem was before Dutch Schultz ever set foot in it. Let's talk about the numbers game. It's 1928, 1929, early 1930s. Harlem is the largest black neighborhood in America, packed with families who migrated north during the Great Migration, chasing jobs, freedom, a better life. But what they found was a segregated city where most of the good jobs, the decent housing, the political power, all of it, stayed in white hands. So Black Harlem built its own economy, and at the center of it was the numbers game, also called policy, also called the daily number. Here's how it worked. Every day, a 3-digit number would be drawn, sometimes based on racetrack results, sometimes pulled from stock market figures, sometimes just pulled out of a hat. You could bet a nickel, a dime, a quarter. Pick the right number, you'd win. Odds were about 600 to 1, so a dime could net you $60. For poor families, that was rent. That was groceries. That was a lifeline. And for the people running it, it was a gold mine. 20, maybe $30 million a year flowing through Harlem. Cash, untaxed, off the books. But here's the thing. The numbers game wasn't just a racket. It was infrastructure. The bankers, the people at the top who financed the game and paid out the winners, they were pillars of the community. They funded black businesses. paid for scholarships, gave loans when white banks wouldn't, kept Harlem's money in Harlem. Let me introduce you to the kings and queens. First, Casper Holstein, a West Indian immigrant who came to New York with nothing and built a numbers empire in the 1920s. By 1928, he's a millionaire. He's funding the Harlem Renaissance, literally, giving money to writers, artists, musicians. He's putting black kids through college. He's respected, loved even. A folk hero. Second, Stephanie St. Clair, Madame Queen, a French-speaking immigrant from Martinique, razor-sharp, fiercely independent, and absolutely ruthless when she needed to be. She ran her own numbers operation and didn't answer to anyone. Stephanie wasn't just a gangster. She was a publicist, a strategist, a one-woman resistance movement. When cops shook her down, she took out full-page ads in the New York Amsterdam News, calling them out by name, badge number, precinct. She warned the black community. Don't trust white racketeers. They're stealing from us. And then there's Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, Bumpy. He came up from South Carolina as a kid, ended up in Harlem in his teens. Smart, literate, could quote Shakespeare, play chess in Marcus Garvey Park, talk philosophy with street preachers. But he was also a brawler, an enforcer, someone who could beat a man half to death and walk away without a scratch. By the early 30s, Bumpy's working for Stephanie St. Clair. He's her muscle, her strategist, her eyes and ears on the street. People know, you cross Madam Queen. You deal with Bumpy. And nobody wants to deal with Bumpy. This was black money, black control, black pride. In a city where damn near everything else was owned and run by white people, Harlem's numbers game was theirs. And then Dutch Schultz decided he wanted it. Arthur Flegenheimer, Dutch Schultz, was a Bronx-born thug who'd made a fortune bootlegging during Prohibition. Beer, whiskey, speakeasies, all of it. He was violent, paranoid, and mean as a snake. And when Prohibition ended in 1933, his biggest revenue stream dried up overnight. So he started looking for new rackets. And when he looked south, into Harlem, he saw $20 to $30 million a year just sitting there, run by what he called, and I'm paraphrasing to keep this clean, small-time colored operators. His attitude was simple. I'm white. I'm connected. I'll take it. And he had the muscle to back it up. Dutch Schultz wasn't just some freelance thug. He had James J. Hines in his pocket, one of the most powerful Tammany Hall bosses in Manhattan. Hines controlled judges, prosecutors, cops. If you were paying Hines, cases disappeared. Evidence vanished. Trials ended in acquittals. So Schultz rolled into Harlem with a strategy. Step 1, offer to partner with the black bankers. He'd take a cut, provide protection, make sure the cops didn't bother them. Step 2, if they refused, he'd have them arrested, beaten, kidnapped, disappeared. Step 3, replace the black operators with his own men, white collectors, white enforcers, white managers. Men who swaggered through Harlem like they owned it, treating the neighborhood like a colony and the residents like subjects. Casper Holstein, kidnapped in 1928, held for ransom, and even after he was released, he was never the same. His operation crumbled. By the mid-30s, he was out. Other black bankers? Some sold out. Some ran. Some fought back and ended up in the morgue. Schultz didn't see this as a war. He saw it as a takeover. Inevitable. Natural. The way things were supposed to work. But Stephanie St. Clair saw it differently. Let's pause for a second and talk about March 19, 1935. A 16-year-old kid named Lino Rivera walks into a store on 125th Street and pockets a 10-cent knife. The manager catches him, drags him into the back. Rumors spread like wildfire. The cops killed him, beat him to death, threw his body in the basement. None of it's true. Rivera's fine, released out the back door. But the rumors are enough. Harlem explodes. 3 people die. Over 100 are injured. Stores are looted, windows smashed, fires set. It's not just about the kid, it's about everything. Unemployment in Harlem is over 50%. Most of the stores are white-owned, and they won't hire black workers. The cops are brutal, corrupt, and racist. People are angry, desperate, and it all comes pouring out in one night of rage. By the time the smoke clears, Harlem is a powder keg. And into this, Dutch Schultz is sending white collectors to shake down black policy players, white enforcers, to rough up anyone who doesn't pay. Every single day, he's pouring gasoline on a fire that's already burning. Stephanie St. Clair sees it. Bumpy sees it. And they decide, enough. Stephanie fights back the way she knows how. Publicity. She takes out ads in the Amsterdam News, the biggest black newspaper in the city. She names names. Corrupt cops taking bribes from Schultz, Tammany Hall politicians protecting him. She writes, "Do not play with white racketeers. They are stealing from your community. They are stealing from you." She becomes a public enemy to Schultz, and public enemies don't live long. Someone tries to kill her. She survives, barely. One story says she hid in a coal bin for hours, while Schultz's men tore her building apart looking for her. But she doesn't back down. Bumpy, meanwhile, handles the ground game. Schultz's collectors start disappearing. Some turn up beaten within an inch of their lives, dumped on the street with broken ribs and warnings to get out of Harlem. Some turn up dead in alleys, in empty lots, in the Harlem River. Bumpy's people ambush Schultz's enforcers. They shoot up policy banks that flip to Schultz. They threaten store owners who start selling Schultz's tickets instead of St. Clair's. But here's the problem. Schultz has the cops. He has the courts. He has Tammany Hall. When Bumpy's men get arrested, they go to jail. When Schultz's men get arrested, the charges disappear. It's not a fair fight. It's not even close. And the bodies keep piling up. Not in 1 week. Not in any kind of neat narrative pattern. Over months. Over years. 1933, 1934, 1935. Dozens of people die. Not 8. Dozens. Scattered across Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn. Policy-related homicides. The police blotters call them. Gangland slayings. Underworld executions. Some are Schultz's men. Some are St. Clair's people. Some are just independent operators caught in the crossfire. This wasn't a tidy revenge story. This wasn't a 1-week countdown with a Hollywood ending. This was a grinding, brutal war of attrition, and for a long time, it looked like Schultz was winning. Real quick, what's the weather like where you are? Sunny? Raining? Snowing? Just curious? Drop it in the comments. So, if the 8 and 7 days story isn't literally true, why does it exist? Why has it survived for 90 years, passed down through generations, told and retold, in Harlem barbershops, pool halls, street corners, and now YouTube videos like this one? Because legends don't form out of nothing. They form because people need them. History is messy. It's complicated. It doesn't fit into neat boxes with clear beginnings and endings. Real wars don't have clean battle lines. Real revenge doesn't happen on a tidy schedule. Real life is chaos. Scattered incidents, half-remembered names. Bodies that turn up weeks apart with no clear connection. But legends? Legends take all that chaos and compress it into something people can hold on to. Something they can remember. Something they can use. The 8 and 7 days story is a symbolic compression of years of killings, years of rage, years of a community watching white gangsters walk through their streets like conquerors. It takes dozens of murders spread across 1933, 34, and 35, and it condenses them into 1 week. One message. One act of defiance. It didn't happen in 7 days. But the feeling of it, the inevitability, the ruthlessness, the sense of justice finally being served, that was real. Think about it. If you're a black Harlemite in 1935, watching Dutch Schultz's men shake down your neighbors, watching them beat policy runners in broad daylight, watching them swagger into your community like they own it, you're angry, you're humiliated, and you're powerless because Schultz has the cops, the courts, the whole system behind him. And then, one day, his men start turning up dead. Maybe it's not 8 and 7 days. Maybe it's 3 and 2 weeks. Maybe it's 5 over a month. But every time one of Schultz's people gets killed, you feel it. You hear about it. It spreads through the neighborhood like electricity. And eventually, someone starts connecting the dots. Someone says, "You hear what happened? Bumpy's taking them out one by one. Schultz disrespected him, and now he's paying the price." Is it true? Maybe. Maybe not. But it feels true. It feels like the kind of justice you're not getting anywhere else. Not from the cops, not from the courts, not from the city that's supposed to protect you. So you repeat it. You add details. You make it cleaner, more dramatic, more satisfying. And over time, the story becomes 8 bodies, 7 days, a countdown that ends with the most feared mobster in New York backing down. That's how legends are born. Now, here's the thing. Even though the specific details might be legend, the story gets something absolutely right. The racial stakes. Dutch Schultz didn't just try to take over Harlem's numbers game as a business transaction. He did it with open, vicious contempt. He used racist slurs as a tool of dominance, a way to make sure every black operator knew their place. He treated Harlem like a colony, and black gangsters like subjects. And that's documented. That's not legend. That's history. Schultz's racism wasn't subtle. It wasn't behind closed doors. People who knew him, who worked with him, who testified about him later, they all said the same thing. He referred to black people with the ugliest slurs imaginable. He believed, genuinely, that black operators were small-time, inferior, incapable of standing up to him. That attitude shaped his strategy. He didn't negotiate. He didn't offer fair partnerships. He steamrolled. He kidnapped. He killed. And he did it all with the assumption that black Harlemites couldn't, or wouldn't, fight back. So when the legend says Schultz stood up in a crowded nightclub and humiliated Bumpy Johnson with a racist tirade, is that literally true? Maybe not in that exact form. But did Schultz publicly humiliate black operators? Absolutely. Did he use racist slurs as psychological warfare? Yes. Did Harlem see this as more than just a business dispute? 100%. This wasn't just about who controlled the numbers. It was about respect, dignity, the ability of black people to control black money in a segregated city where they controlled almost nothing else. And when the legend says Bumpy responded with, "You got 7 days. After that, every man you got in Harlem is a dead man," is that a direct quote? Probably not. But it's the kind of thing that would have circulated through Harlem's barbershops, pool halls, church basements. The kind of story people would have told each other, whispered about, celebrated in private. Because whether Bumpy said those exact words or not, people needed to believe he said them. They needed to believe that someone, finally, stood up to Dutch Schultz and didn't blink. That someone looked a powerful white gangster in the eye and said, "You don't own us. You don't control us. And if you try, you'll pay for it." That's not just legend. That's resistance. That's pride. That's a community taking back its narrative. And here's the wildest part. The story outlived everyone in it. Flash forward to the 1960s. A new generation of Harlem gangsters is coming up. Guys who weren't even born when Bumpy and Schultz were at war. And they're still telling this story. still repeating the lesson. Flash forward to the 70s, the 80s, the crack era. Different drugs, different players, different gangs. But the story's still there, passed down like folklore. Don't disrespect Harlem. Don't disrespect black gangsters. Don't walk into our neighborhood like you own it. Remember what happened to Dutch Schultz. The message became a warning, a piece of cultural DNA embedded in Harlem's underworld. And it wasn't just gangsters. Regular people told the story too. Grandfathers to grandsons, barbers to customers, teachers to students, in unofficial histories that never made it into textbooks. Because it wasn't really about Dutch Schultz or Bumpy Johnson. It was about something bigger. The idea that arrogance has a price, that disrespect has consequences, that even when the system is rigged against you, even when the cops and the courts and the politicians are on their side, you can still fight back. You can still make them pay. That's the power of myth. It stops being about what literally happened and starts being about what it means. And what this story means, what it's always meant, is that some insults can't be walked back. Some lines, once crossed, lead to blood. Dutch Schultz crossed that line, and whether it took 7 days or 7 months, he paid for it. Let me show you how. While Dutch Schultz was waging war in Harlem, he had an even bigger problem. His name was Thomas E. Dewey, and he was the special prosecutor who had Schultz squarely in his crosshairs. Dewey was playing from the Al Capone playbook. He prosecuted Schultz for tax evasion, the same charge that had taken down the Chicago mob boss just a few years earlier. And for Schultz, this wasn't just a legal annoyance. This was an existential threat. The case went to trial. The first jury hung. The second trial ended in acquittal. Schultz walked free. But the damage was done. His aura of invincibility, that larger-than-life swagger that had made him untouchable for so long, was cracked. People had seen him sweat. And in the underworld, that's blood in the water. Schultz, now furious and increasingly paranoid, decided to do something that would seal his fate. He started planning to assassinate Thomas Dewey, not intimidate him, not bribe him, kill him, a sitting prosecutor, in broad daylight if necessary. To Schultz, this made perfect sense. Dewey was coming after him. So eliminate the threat. Simple. But in the new world of organized crime that Lucky Luciano and the Commission had built, this wasn't simple at all. This was insane. Luciano had restructured the Italian mafia into something resembling a corporation. There were rules now. Hierarchy. Strategic thinking. The old days of hot-headed violence and reckless public hits were supposed to be over. The Commission, made up of the biggest bosses including Luciano, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, and others, had one goal: keep the money flowing and keep the feds at bay. And Schultz wanted to murder a special prosecutor. The Commission was terrified. They knew exactly what would happen if Dewey was killed. It would bring down a federal apocalypse on all of them. Every mob operation in every city would be under siege. The government would spare no expense. It would be the end of everything they'd built. So they held a vote, and the decision was unanimous. Dutch Schultz had to go. The contract went to Murder Inc., the enforcement arm of the syndicate, the most efficient, most ruthless killers in the business. And on October 23rd, 1935, they made their move. Schultz was at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. It was one of his regular spots. He was there with 3 of his top men, his bodyguard, his accountant, and his lieutenant. They were sitting at a table in the back, talking business, probably thinking they were safe. Schultz got up and walked to the men's room. That's when the gunmen walked in. They opened fire. Schultz's men didn't stand a chance. The gunfire was quick, brutal, efficient. 3 men dead or dying in seconds. And then one of the killers walked calmly to the men's room, pushed open the door, and found Schultz standing there. He shot him once in the abdomen. Schultz didn't die right away. He lingered for an entire day, drifting in and out of consciousness, delirious with pain and fever. The things he said in those final hours were recorded by police and have since become legendary, rambling, poetic, utterly incoherent. Phrases about mother, about French-Canadian bean soup, about bears and harmony. It was the final mad soliloquy of a man who'd lived violently and was now dying the same way. On October 24, 1935, Dutch Schultz was pronounced dead, and that's when the legend says something remarkable happened. Stephanie St. Clair, Harlem's numbers queen, the woman Schultz had tried to crush, allegedly sent a telegram to his deathbed. It contained just one line: "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." Now, whether she actually sent that telegram is debated. There's no hard proof. But whether it was real or apocryphal doesn't really matter. The sentiment was real. The message was real. In Harlem, people saw Schultz's death as cosmic payback. He had come into their neighborhood with arrogance, racism, and violence. He had terrorized black operators, stolen their businesses, murdered their people. And now he was dead, gunned down in a bathroom, bleeding out while babbling nonsense. Harlem didn't mourn him. Harlem celebrated. So here's where we tie it all together. Did Bumpy Johnson really kill 8 of Dutch Schultz's men in 7 days, forcing Schultz to retreat from Harlem in fear? Probably not. Not literally. That number is almost certainly exaggerated, the kind of myth-making that happens when a community needs a hero and a story to tell. But did Bumpy's crew kill some of Schultz's men in the weeks leading up to his assassination? Almost certainly yes. The violence was real. The resistance was real. Schultz was losing ground in Harlem, and Bumpy was one of the key figures making that happen. And did Harlem see Schultz's assassination by the Commission as directly connected to his war on black operators? Absolutely. In the minds of the people who lived through it, Schultz's downfall started the moment he tried to take over Harlem. The Mafia might have pulled the trigger, but Harlem had already beaten him. The 8 in 7 days story is Harlem's way of claiming credit for a death the Mafia ordered, but Harlem earned. It's a way of saying, we fought back, we didn't bow, and when he fell, it was because we stood up. And in the end, that's more true than any body count. Dutch Schultz was dead. And suddenly, Harlem's underworld had a massive power vacuum. Schultz's operation had been generating enormous revenue. The numbers racket alone was pulling in millions, and now it was just sitting there, leaderless, waiting for someone to claim it. The question was, who? The obvious answer was the Italians. Lucky Luciano's organization had just eliminated Schultz precisely because he'd become a liability. They had the muscle, the connections, the infrastructure. They could walk into Harlem and take over the whole operation if they wanted to. But here's the thing. They'd learned from Schultz's mistake. Schultz had tried to colonize Harlem. He'd rolled in with guns and arrogance, treating black operators like subjects to be conquered. And it had been a disaster. The community had resisted. Violence had erupted. People had died. And even though Schultz had made money, the cost had been astronomical. He'd made enemies everywhere, drawn heat from prosecutors, and ultimately gotten himself killed. Luciano and the Commission didn't want to repeat that playbook. They wanted the revenue, yes, but they wanted it without the war, without the attention, without turning Harlem into a battlefield. So they needed someone who could manage Harlem from the inside. Someone black. Someone the community would accept. Someone who could keep the money flowing without constant bloodshed. They needed Bumpy Johnson. Luciano's people reached out. And this wasn't a demand. This was a negotiation. Because Bumpy had something they needed, and they had something he needed. Why Bumpy? Out of all the black operators still standing, why was he the one they approached? First, he was capable. He'd proven himself in the war against Schultz. He was smart, strategic, and ruthless when he needed to be. He could organize people, enforce discipline, and think several moves ahead. Second, he could talk to Italians as near equals. This wasn't a small thing. Most black operators were treated as second class by the mafia. But Bumpy had respect. He'd fought alongside them in some cases, against them in others, and he'd earned their acknowledgement as a serious player. Third, and maybe most importantly, he had the trust of the community. People in Harlem knew Bumpy. They'd grown up with him. They'd seen him stand up to Schultz. If Bumpy told them to follow a certain system, they would. If someone else tried to impose that same system, there'd be resistance, resentment, violence. So the deal was struck. Here's how it worked. Harlem's numbers racket would stay black run on a day-to-day basis. Black bankers would collect the bets. Black runners would work the streets. Black enforcers would handle local disputes. The operations, the faces, the management, all of it would remain in black hands. But a percentage of the profits would flow upward to the Italian mafia. Call it a tax. Call it protection money. Call it tribute. Whatever you called it, it was the price of semi-autonomy. And Bumpy was the middleman. He was the bridge between two worlds. He protected Harlem from outside predators, Italians or otherwise, who might try to move in. He ensured that the Italian bosses got their cut on time, every time, no excuses. And he policed disputes within the community, settling beefs before they turned into wars. It was a delicate position. He had to be tough enough that the Italians respected him, but fair enough that Harlem trusted him. He had to enforce the tribute system while also protecting the community from exploitation. He had to be a diplomat and an enforcer all at once, and for the most part, it worked. Now, let's be clear about what this deal meant. Dutch Schultz had tried to own Harlem. He'd wanted to treat black bankers as serfs, as employees in his empire, with no power and no autonomy. He'd wanted total control. Bumpy's deal was different. Harlem remained semi-autonomous. It had its own structure, its own leadership, its own operations. But it was tributary to the Italians. It paid for the privilege of self-governance. Was this a win? Yes. But a complicated one. Harlem didn't fully win. It didn't achieve independence. It still had to pay. It was still, in some sense, under the thumb of white organized crime. But it refused to be outright colonized. It held on to its own identity, its own power structures, its own dignity. And in the context of 1930s America, where black people were being subjugated in almost every arena of life, that refusal mattered. Bumpy had extracted a measure of autonomy and respect from people who didn't usually give either. And over the next 30-plus years, Bumpy Johnson became a legend. He became the face of black organized crime in Harlem, the man everyone knew, the man everyone had a story about. He controlled the rackets, arbitrated disputes, and built a network that stretched across the neighborhood. But he was more than just a crime boss. He became a folk hero. People told stories about how he gave money to the poor, how he paid rent for families about to be evicted, how he bought food for hungry kids. Whether all those stories were true or exaggerated doesn't really matter. People believed them because they wanted to. They needed someone to root for. He was also a fixture in the community in quieter ways. You could find him on warm afternoons sitting in the park, playing chess, talking to old-timers, watching the neighborhood go by. He wasn't hiding. He was Harlem, and Harlem was him. But his life was also a cautionary tale. He spent years in prison. Multiple bids, hard time, years lost behind bars. He lived by violence, and violence defined his world. Friends betrayed. Enemies multiplied. Trust was rare. In 1968, Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack. At least that's the official story. Some people suspected poison. Whispers circulated, but nothing was ever proven. What never faded, though, was his reputation. Long after his death, people in Harlem remembered him as the man who stood up to Dutch Schultz, the man who made white mobsters respect black power, the man who negotiated a deal that kept Harlem in black hands, even if it wasn't perfect. Bumpy Johnson became myth, and myths, once they take root, are harder to kill than any man. So why does this story matter? Why are we spending all this time talking about a turf war from the 1930s between gangsters most people have never heard of? Because the Harlem Numbers War wasn't just a turf fight. It was about something much bigger. It was about economic control in a segregated city where black people were systematically locked out of legitimate wealth building. It was about racial dignity in an era when black people were openly treated as inferior, not just socially, but legally. It was about community power when almost every major institution, every bank, every business, every political machine was white-owned and white-controlled. The numbers game wasn't just gambling, it was Harlem's economy. The money that flowed through those operations paid rent. It funded small businesses. It sent kids to school. It bankrolled political campaigns and community organizations. It was one of the few sources of capital that stayed in black hands and circulated within the black community. So when Dutch Schultz rolled into Harlem and tried to take it over, people didn't just see a mobster expanding his territory. They saw economic colonialism. They saw a white man trying to extract wealth from a black neighborhood while giving nothing back. They saw their autonomy, their dignity, their future being stolen. And they fought back. Now let's talk about the Cotton Club. Even if the confrontation between Bumpy and Schultz didn't happen exactly the way the legend says, the Cotton Club itself is the perfect symbol for what this war was really about. Picture it. Black musicians on stage, playing the hottest jazz in the world. Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway. Legends. Black waiters serving drinks. Black cooks in the kitchen. Black dancers performing. The whole operation runs on black talent, black labor, black culture. But the audience? All white. The patrons sitting at those tables, drinking those drinks, enjoying that music? Exclusively white. Black people weren't allowed in as customers. They could perform, they could serve, but they couldn't sit down and be treated as equals. That spatial arrangement, that power dynamic, mirrors exactly what Schultz was trying to do with the numbers racket. He wanted black people to do the work, take the risks, generate the revenue. But he wanted white men to control it, profit from it, and make all the decisions. It was exploitation dressed up as business. And Schultz's biggest operational error, the thing that ultimately destroyed him, was that his racial arrogance became strategic blindness. He looked at black operators and saw people he considered inherently inferior. Small-time, unsophisticated, incapable of real organization or serious resistance. He thought he could roll over them because, in his mind, they simply weren't on his level. So he underestimated their capacity for violence and organization. He dismissed their political connections and their deep roots in the community. He never believed, not for a second, that they could dictate terms to him or force him into a corner. He was wrong, and that miscalculation cost him everything. Not just Harlem, not just money, his life. Because while he was busy underestimating black gangsters, they were busy proving him wrong, and by the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. The commission had already decided he was too dangerous to keep alive. Now, flash forward, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, even today. Every generation of Harlem criminals, every hustler, every street operator knows some version of this story. The details might change. The names might get mixed up. but the core message stays the same. Don't disrespect Harlem. Don't disrespect black gangsters. Remember what happened to Dutch. Whether 8 men actually died in 7 days or not, the moral of the story is real. It's been passed down like scripture, like a warning carved into the collective memory of the neighborhood. Choices have consequences. Arrogance has a price. And some insults, some violations of respect and dignity can't be walked back. Dutch Schultz learned that lesson too late, but Harlem never forgot it. And that's why this story still matters. Because it's not just about gangsters and guns and money. It's about a community that refused to be erased. It's about people who fought for their dignity when the whole world told them they didn't deserve any. It's about the power of resistance, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about what happens when you underestimate people who have nothing left to lose. So let's bring this all home. Let's separate what we know for sure from what we're not certain about. And talk about why the legend matters just as much as the facts. Here's what we know for sure. Dutch Schultz did wage a brutal, calculated campaign to control Harlem's numbers racket. He had the backing of corrupt politicians and dirty cops. He used violence, intimidation, and murder to try to crush black operators and take over their businesses. Stephanie St. Clair and Bumpy Johnson did resist him. They fought back with everything they had. They organized. They retaliated. They refused to surrender. Dozens of people died in the years-long war. The violence was real. The bloodshed was real. The stakes were life and death. Dutch Schultz was assassinated in October 1935 by the Mafia Commission, not because of Harlem, but because he'd planned to kill Thomas Dewey, a sitting prosecutor. That decision would have brought federal heat down on every mob operation in the country, so the commission decided Schultz had to go. And after his death, Bumpy Johnson negotiated a deal with Lucky Luciano's organization that kept Harlem's numbers racket locally run, in black hands, while paying tribute to the Italians. It wasn't total independence, but it was autonomy. It was respect. All of that is documented. All of that is history. Now, here's what we don't know. We don't know if a specific confrontation happened at the Cotton Club on September 16, 1935. There's no newspaper report, no police record, no eyewitness account we can verify. We don't know if exactly 8 of Schultz's men were killed in exactly 7 days, with countdown notes pinned to their bodies. We don't know if Bumpy literally walked up to Schultz and said, "You got 7 days." Those details, they might be true. They might be embellished. They might be complete myth. We just don't know. But here's the thing. The legend matters more than the facts, because legends preserve emotional truths that archives can't capture. The 8 in 7 days story isn't just about a body count. It compresses years of violence, community rage, solidarity, resistance, and the moral stakes of dignity and respect into a single narrative that people can remember, retell, and live by. It takes the chaos and complexity of a years-long war and distills it into something clear, something powerful, something that carries a message. We fought back, and we won. It's not a lie. It's a distillation. It's the way communities make sense of their own history, the way they pass down lessons from one generation to the next. And in Harlem, that lesson was simple. Don't let anyone take what's yours without a fight. Don't bow to people who see you as less than human. Stand up even when it's dangerous, especially when it's dangerous. That's the truth the legend protects. So let's return to that first image, the one we started with. Vincent Clutch Mell lying in a Harlem alley, a note pinned to his chest. 7 days. Maybe it didn't happen exactly that way. Maybe the details are off. Maybe the timeline is compressed, or the names are wrong. But somewhere, sometime, in the chaos of 1935 Harlem, someone left a message. and New York's underworld got it loud and clear. Harlem is not for sale, and some insults will cost you everything. If this story got you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I've got more true crime deep dives coming that you won't want to miss. These are the stories that don't make it into the textbooks, the ones that live in the streets, and the memories of the people who were there. Drop a comment. Do you think the Cotton Club confrontation really happened, or is it pure legend? Let's debate. I want to hear what you think. And before you go, share this video with someone who loves true crime history. This is the kind of story that deserves to be told. The kind of story that reminds us that history isn't just about presidents and wars. It's about people fighting for their dignity, their community, their right to exist on their own terms. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.